Have you ever felt guilty for growing apart from someone who once felt as close as home? We grew up hearing that if a friendship ends, then it shouldn't have started in the first place. But maybe some friendships don't end because they were meaningless. Maybe they end because they mattered during one chapter of life, but were never meant to fit in the next one. I think it matters to know that growing up doesn't necessarily mean turning against someone, or moving on doesn't necessarily mean turning against someone. These days, some friendships can feel mandatory and kind of permanent in high school. It feels like the people around you today are the people who will define you forever. The group chats, the lunch breaks, the inside jokes, it all feels so significant right now. So the moment you start feeling disconnected from someone, it can be perceived as betrayal. But not only of the person, almost of your own past. I was sitting in class the other day, looking around at people I had grown up with, people that I truly share memories with. And I realized that somewhere along the way, we started becoming different individuals with almost opposite perspectives. But there wasn't a reason I could point to, just a feeling, a quiet realization that our path became completely different. And for a moment, it felt like losing, until I realized I was finding myself. And from that point on, letting go stopped feeling like a failure. It felt like a silent win. Sometimes, two people drift beyond each other. One person may want depth, while the other wants convenience. One may value honesty and transparency, while the other values image. It doesn't mean that one became more evolved than the other, but that they just don't fit anymore. And in that case, distance is way healthier than constant friction. Growing up changes us, quietly, unevenly, and continuously. Two people can laugh at the same things at 13 and completely disagree on what truly matters at 17. Two people can talk about the same things and agree on everything as children and still become stranger in values and priorities just a few years later. Because the fact is, not every friendship lasts forever. And as much as this idea can sound difficult, it's actually freeing, since it allows us to stop forcing what no longer fits. At some point, growing up means being protective of your time, your energy, because your life, your future standards, and your priorities are waiting for you. So sometimes what is better is to just distance yourself from people, because distancing yourself prevents that you stay in a false interpretation of the friendship. Distancing yourself tells the truth gently. So distance, when chosen with respect, can actually be one of the sincerest forms of care, because it prevents people from living inside a false interpretation of the relationship. But honestly, pulling away can be done with arrogance and disrespect, but it can also be wise and gentle. The difference is, one is driven by pride, while the other is guided by awareness. Awareness allows us to outgrow without humiliating, to detach without gossiping, to create distance without provoking war. Moving forward is a real challenge that demands sacrifice. The kind of sacrifice that involves leaving people behind without resenting them. We need to stop acting as if every boundary is an act of cruelty, because it's possible to care about someone and still acknowledge that a shared future is not guaranteed, and maybe even impossible. There won't always be a huge argument or a big explosion, but rather a growing realization. A realization that every conversation is leaving you drained, that you are constantly shrinking yourself just to feel understood, that your peace is being traded for familiarity, that what was meant to feel natural now feels heavy. And the problem is, a lot of people stay anyway, whether it's because of history, because they don't want to look rude, because they're scared of being misunderstood, or because the phrase, "we've been friends for so long," starts to feel like a reason strong enough on its own. We stay connected to people not because the bond is still right, but because we're still attached to who they used to be, how they used to treat us. And that's where a lot of emotional confusion begins. We're not only grieving the person, we're grieving the version of ourselves that existed in that friendship. The younger version, the simpler version, the effortless version. Nowadays, social life can feel like survival. Being included matters. Belonging matters. So we keep ties that no longer feel right simply because the fear of being alone seems scarier than the fear of arguing constantly. But pretending is worse. Being surrounded and still feeling unseen is worse. What are we protecting when we refuse to let go? Love? Comfort? The friendship? The memories? It's hard to be honest with ourselves. It's hard to admit that the bond that used to feel so magical at first is now simply non-existent. It's hard to admit that we aren't compatible anymore. So sometimes, and we actually need to learn when loyalty is beautiful and when it becomes self-abandonment. Because loyalty should never demand that you stay in emotional exhaustion just to prove you're a good person. And it definitely shouldn't pull you away from who you are trying to become. Now, of course, I'm not saying we should leave the moment things get difficult. Not every misunderstanding means the relationship or the friendship is over. Not every uncomfortable moment means run away. Some friendships deserve the patience and the perseverance because some friendships survive change and they even become stronger. But here's the point. Some do and some don't. Nevertheless, every connection is entitled to understanding, acknowledgement, communication, and forgiveness. But there should always be a limit to this openness, because nothing deserves infinite, unreciprocated, and non-beneficial effort. And every setback is actually a redirection. But it might not feel like it, because every time we become someone new, we lose pieces of who we once were. We talk a lot about letting go the past, letting go fears, letting go unhealthy habits, but we don't talk enough about letting go people peacefully. Peace comes from knowing and accepting that not every relationship can be fixed. Not every person needs to be convinced. Not every misunderstanding needs a courtroom. And here, maturity is key. It isn't about proving a point, being always right, winning every argument. It's about knowing and understanding when conflict is unnecessary and when distance is needed. Moving on without moving against means not creating an enemy where there isn't one, and not being driven by a constant need of revenge. Not every goodbye needs to be spoken out loud to be understood. Not every ending has to be ugly for it to be real. Letting go isn't losing. It's making room for clarity, for better habits, for healthier connections, for the future self you want to become. We cannot carry everything with us on the journey of life. So sometimes the most mature thing you can do is wish people well, thank them for the good times, and keep on walking. Not because they meant nothing, but because your future deserves the version of you that is not afraid to choose peace and change. Growth asks for release, and one of the most powerful forms of release is simply understanding that you can move on without moving against. Thank you.